Well, hey, Travis, thanks for being here today. We're going to have a great conversation.
Look forward to it. Absolutely.
Yeah, so you do work with Element 26, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. One of the things that I like that's on your website, you have a line, I have it written down here because I wanted to ask you specifically about it. So on the website, you talk about that men are called to put our faith into action. And I'd love to just start there at a high level for you, for your ministry work. What does that mean when you say men are
Sure.
called to put their faith into action?
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially you look at the age that we're in right now. We're constantly being challenged as men in our role, and our faith plays a huge part in that role. There's obviously scriptural guidance in our calling as husbands, as fathers, and men in the workforce, and to put our faith into action, to say that we believe in the principles that are in Scripture. That's got to show in our life.
Yeah.
I tell my boys, the quickest way to see fruit, or to tell the walk of someone, is look at the fruit in their life.
Yeah.
So big picture, that's what it is. It's, do we see the work of Christ in our lives in all the areas that we walk?
And what are a couple examples? What would that look like in a guy at, at home or at his job? Like how would, if I'm looking and I'm trying to see that example, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, it starts in your home. And I tell guys all the time, especially when they're looking to getting plugged in and doing ministry. And first of all, I'll say that we're all called to ministry. Whether you have a ministry, as men, we're called to be a ministry. We're all directed to go make disciples. And ultimately, it starts in your home life. What is your walk like? We can't lead others if we're not leading ourselves. So to me, it starts right there. What does my quiet time look like? What does my walk with God look like? Where am I putting Him in my life? My choices. And then from there, am I discipling my children, in my case, my boys, am I discipling them and leading them? And ultimately I think that's the heart of it. Things flow out from there. When you have a strong core in your personal walk, and you're walking with Christ in your home, that it's easy to carry that outside of your home. It's when you're faking it at home that it becomes more of a challenge, outside the home. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's really, I mean, putting it in action. That's what it is. That's what it looks like. Is, are you taking time to disciple your own kids? It's easy to walk around and speak on discipling others, but are you doing it in your own home first and
Yeah.
foremost?
Yeah. And I love that you said that because one of the things that I run into with men sometimes is they're missing that aspect of leading at home and teaching at home. And what I like to share with guys is church is to assist you. Church
Mhm.
is to come alongside and help you. Church is not to be the only sole source of teaching and training that your children, that your family has when it comes to the gospel, when it comes to the Bible. And you need to read at home. You need to be reading the Bible, not just reading a commentary that, someone else wrote. Well, those are great, nothing against those, but you need to be reading the Bible yourself, and you need to be teaching at home. And I'll ask guys from time to time, when was the last time you shared the gospel at home?
Mhm.
And it's not very common for most people.
Yeah,
They feel like, well, we
absolutely.
went to church. They took care of it at church, but church is to assist you. That's not to be the only way. So I love that you started that, because yeah, we've got to see that at home. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And one of the big things with your work with Element 26 is bringing together guys to form a brotherhood.
Mhm.
And that's what we're going to get into a little bit more here, is this idea of Christian Brotherhood. So why don't we start at a high level there and say, what is Christian Brotherhood?
Yeah, it's interesting. The more I've kind of gotten into studying brotherhood and really looking at discipleship, is how they run together. We separate the two, and really, if you look at discipleship, it's coming alongside somebody. It's not just a weekly Bible study, but it's walking through life with them, and and that's what brotherhood is. And it's, so there's a correlation between the two. But really, you look at biblical brotherhood. It's having guys that are in your corner and going to support you and stand with you through your faith, through your battles. But also, man, real brotherhood is going to be those guys that are they're gonna straighten you out when you need it too. And it's important to have that. So big picture, I mean, when I'm looking at brotherhood, I'm looking at guys that are like-minded men that are going to come alongside me. And we're going to walk, and we're going to continue to grow together through the process.
And just like asking, what does faith into action look like? What does that look like when you've got that? Because um, a lot of people don't know exactly what that means, especially guys who don't have it.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, most men don't have that, so they don't really know what does that mean, that somebody's walking alongside you, that somebody's doing life with you like that. But what does that look like? What does that mean?
Sure. And, I think the easiest example is just look at my own life. I spent a lot of years in church. During that time, I was serving. I was doing all kinds of things in church, and I had this great front, like I had my life together. And I'd go home. My home life was a wreck at the time. I didn't have a good walk with Christ, and when kind of crisis hit, and I was put kind of backed into a corner, I didn't have some guys to come around me, and it was a miserable experience. And I went to a men's group, and those guys were real. And it was really the first group of guys. There was only four of us to start with, and they were so real that it was my first sense of brotherhood. And man, they walked through, and these guys were they they got pretty harsh with me at times. If there were things that I was messing up, man, they got real. But they backed it up with scripture. It wasn't just
Yeah.
condemning. It was walking through and pointing out why what I was doing was wrong, and walking me through that process. And man, I came out of that with just a whole new appreciation for having these guys. And these are the guys that I know that 2 o'clock in the morning, my car breaks down the side of the road, that I can call these guys. They're going to be there for me. Or really in a more practical sense, the struggles that we have. These are guys that if I'm in the middle of a battle and a struggle, I'm calling these guys. These are my go-to guys, and I know that there's not going to be judgment or condemnation out of them, but they're going to, again, they're going to apply scriptural advice to it and walk me through that. And to me, that's just a practical way. It's finding guys. And the thing that you have to understand is these guys don't have to be biblical scholars. We tend to
Right.
think, well, I can't disciple, or I can't walk with somebody until I am. And man, it's coming along, people. It's just, hey, let's walk side by side and let's walk through this together, and let's research it together. And what is God's plan in this? And you just kind of grow in wisdom together like that. So that's real biblical
Mm-hmm.
application in life for sure.
Yeah. 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 And I have a similar story to you. At the low points, I didn't really have anybody that I could turn to, anybody I could go to. And so I made a very conscious choice that I am going to find these men, and I'm gonna bring them into my life in one way or another. And thankfully with what I do, I have guys kind of all over the country now, and it's just awesome to have that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something that most men don't realize that they're missing,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're being that lone wolf, when you're thinking you've got everything under control, you don't really see the problem, because you
Yeah.
have all these blind spots that you're not aware of. So the lone wolf thing, I think, is a big problem in our culture, in our society. What are your thoughts on that? What are some of your takes on guys just feeling like, I've got it all figured out, I'm good, I don't really even need a brotherhood, I'm good by myself? What would you say to somebody who's thinking that?
Yeah, the thing is, the more I've come to realize, the more I spend time at these retreats and talking to these guys, is that it's a front that we put up. We as men, we like to say that we've got it all figured out and we don't want help.
Yep.
But man, once you get guys to drop that guard, we do. I mean, it's been we want guys to come alongside of us. So first of all, is just being real with yourself. Like, do you really feel like you have this under control, or are you battling pride? And a lot of times that's what it is. Pride stands in the way. It doesn't allow us to drop our guard and be real with these guys. And that's really the biggest thing that we've seen, is guys being willing to drop that ego. And it's a cultural thing. We grew up in a generation of men got to be strong. We got to we don't cry, and we don't and it's not like that. We got to be able to drop that guard. But so really a lot of it is pride. And I look at going back to Nehemiah. I look at the story of Nehemiah when he's rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. There was a point where they were under attack, so he divided the men, and half the men he had working and half the men he had standing guard, and they would rotate. And man, that's how we are as men. We're in seasons of life where there are times when, man, we've got things going right and things are looking good for us, and we've got times where we're in a rebuilding process, and we're all going to go through those cycles. So having those guys in your life, that when you do have those downtimes, that they're going to stand guard for you, just like building that wall, man. It's so important. It's so crucial for these guys to have in their life.
Yeah. You mentioned a moment ago a little bit of your own story about your own life, and having some stuff messed up, and you briefly mentioned in there the retreats that you do now.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the bridge in between? How did you go from I've got my own life kind of messed up at the moment, to now I'm leading these great retreats with
Sure.
with a lot of guys, and doing life-changing work. So what happened in between? How'd you get from point A to point B?
Yeah. Well, I'll condense it down the best I can. It was a journey for sure. So I joined that men's group, and honestly, I went to that men's group for the sole purpose of telling my wife it wouldn't work. I went in there prideful. I'll meet with these guys and go home and say, see, they couldn't help me. And like I said, those guys were so genuine and so real, and it for the first time, it really clicked for me. So as I plugged in with those guys, one of them invited me on a backpacking trip, and we went on this backpacking trip. And prior to that, kind of the crisis that I hit that broke me, I've got a 12-year-old special needs son. He was born premature and had a lot of issues. So that's what really kind of hit me really hard. And there's a whole backstory to it, but I was just really struggling being a special needs dad, and I had all this anger towards God, towards life, and I went to this group and walking through, and he invited me on this backpacking trip, and we went about 30 miles over 4 days, and in the process of that, as we'd break down things around these fire pits and talk through, and these guys did such an amazing job of leading that I began to realize that wasn't the source of my anger. The source of my anger really came from childhood wounds that I'd never addressed, father wounds that I'd carried with me that I'd never faced. I just kind of ignored them and stuffed them away and went on into my adulthood. So as I worked through those things, man, I came off that trip at the end of those 4 days, just feeling completely refreshed. I mean, that was, on a mountaintop for the first time, forgave my dad fully for the first time. And man, when I came off there, I told the guy that invited me, I said, man, we need a place like this for more men where guys can be real. And honestly, it was a continuation of what my small group was. We sat around these fire pits, and these guys were real. I mean, they were very bold and blatant about life. And I thought, man, why can't we build a place where more guys, have the freedom to do this? And so that was kind of where we started, and got it kicked off, and struggled from there to start, because I tell people I tried to outrun God. God put a passion in my heart, tried to outrun him. But man, he's done great things through it.
Yeah. So what was your first event like?
So our very first event was a backpacking trip. I came back, I saw what was successful, so I said I'm going to mimic what they do, and that was my goal, was just to mimic everything that they did, and they came alongside me, and they did a great job of walking me through, and we had a good event. We had I want to say 15, 16 guys on that first event that we went on, and it was great. I mean, we had a good experience, but it wasn't what I wanted. And that's, that was my big thing, is I kept trying to force my vision on it. Mm-hmm. And, after about 3 years, finally had that moment where I was ready to quit, and, spent some time in prayer and said, okay, God, I want this to be yours, not mine. And, I joke, I think he kind of said, okay, well, now that you're out of the way, we can do something. And,
yeah, exactly.
We've seen it grow since then, but I mean, the first event, it was good. I mean, it was not a bad event, but it was definitely, there's a lot of things I was trying to force in ministry instead of just really following God's lead.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so hard, especially when you get a vision, when you get a calling, and you're like, I know what I want this to be. I know where I want this to go. But yeah, you have to be patient and say, it's actually not about what I want. It's about what he wants, and what does he want for this, and what does he want out of this. And yeah. So you talked about the backpacking there, and one of the things I think that men are struggling with today is lack of adventure, lack of getting outdoors, and it's not just where you live. If we were talking about this a while ago, we might say, well, it's because you live in a city. You live in downtown Atlanta, or you're in downtown Dallas, or Chicago, or whatever. So obviously you're not going to go backpacking. You live in a city. But with our world today, even if you live remotely, we're meeting here on Zoom, we're meeting here online. You can spend your whole life inside behind a screen. So I think men are missing out on the adventure element, on the outside element. What does that play to you? What is the role of adventure play in men, in brotherhood, and getting together? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think the big thing to understand is men, we're wired to accomplish things together, and when you go through this big adventure, whether it's a backpacking trip or, doing a construction job together, or, whatever it is, when you have that bond where you've completed something together, I mean, it totally changes the relationship that you have through that situation. So yeah, for me, I think it's getting guys, sometimes getting them out of their comfort zone. We've got some guys that have gone backpacking with us that were not backpackers at all. And,
Yep.
but once
Yep.
they get out there and there's just something about doing something that they didn't think they could do, overcoming something that they couldn't think. And obviously, as we go through that, there's a spiritual application as
Sure.
well to the challenges that we face. And, but yeah, I mean, just to get them out there to do something that they didn't think they could do, or get them out of their comfort zone. And some guys, an adventure is completely different. A backpacking trip is an extreme adventure for some, and
Right.
sleeping in a tent and not moving the whole weekend is an adventure for some. So
Yeah.
it's just meeting guys where they are, and,
Yeah.
and really just breaking down those walls.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think men need that in their lives. We've become a bit too stationary, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not really out seeking that. We don't have to. We have a life of convenience. We have a life of comfort. Like, you don't even have to go to a grocery store, right? Your groceries can be delivered to you. There might have been your favorite restaurant, and now that can be delivered to you. So you don't even have to leave the house for that. Your
Mm-hmm.
entertainment all gets streamed into your house. There's not really a reason. and
Right.
and so men are missing out on that. And if we're asking guys to tell us a great story of your life, to tell us a great story that happened in your past, it's gonna have some element of adventure in it. It's gonna have some element of struggle and conquering and accomplishing. That's just the way we are. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I like to joke about that. If a guy, is feeling the pressure of, he got a flat tire and he's got to change his tire, the story's a lot better if there was a storm on the way and he could see a tornado over the horizon and he had to change the tire. Like, it's just a better story.
Absolutely.
So we love those opportunities. We love those moments of adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, you have your events now with bigger groups. You're not doing the, at least, from what I've seen, not the
Mm-hmm.
smaller backpacking trips, but the bigger groups. It's a different dynamic. So, one of the things that I think is great in a bigger group is sort of the emotion can the emotion can grow. You can have something happening, and yeah, you might have a private conversation between one or two people, but if you've got a room of a lot of guys, you
Mm-hmm.
can really feel the spirit moving in a very, very real way in a big room. What are some great examples or some great stories of things that have happened, that you've been a part of or that you've seen for yourself or some of the guys that you've got a chance to work with?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, and you're right. The dynamic is completely different. And one of our worries was as we grew was that we'd lose that, kind of the intimacy of the small group setting. So we gather in big groups. We'll have roughly 200 guys that get together. And the one thing I will say about that is when you have 200 men worshiping together, it is one of the most amazing noises
Mhm.
you'll ever get to experience. It's such a cool environment to be in,
Yeah.
and to see these guys genuinely worship the way they do, it's an incredible thing to be a part of. So I love that part of the big experience. But one thing that we've really stuck to is we break out every night into small groups. So we still have those small group fire pits that guys go to and sit around these fire pits, because it's still important to give these guys. And some guys jump right into them, open up. Some guys won't say a thing. But man, just a cool story I'll share with you. We had a couple brothers that came in fall of 2021. They came to our retreat and they invited another brother of theirs to attend. And he was a non-believer. He had no desire at all to talk about Jesus, and he made that very, very clear the first night around the fire pit. But through that weekend, man, he sat around these fire pits and he heard these guys share stories, and he was part of the worship and the speakers and through all that. And Friday night he announced his fire pit. He said, "Man, I don't want to be here. I'm here to see my brothers. I don't want to hear any talk about Jesus, or I'm not going to share anything about Jesus. I'm just going to sit around here and keep to myself." And Saturday night, about 10:30 on a mountain, it was about 33 degrees. We baptized him, and the
Wow.
guy's been on
Yeah.
fire since then. So
Yeah.
there is something special about a gathering like that. I mean, you can just feel the presence of the Holy Spirit just coming in there, and you can feel things happening. But really, it's just different. I mean, you can feel that same thing in smaller groups. I know you
Mhm.
do
Yeah.
smaller events, and you
Yep.
can feel that same thing there. It just feels a little different with a large group of guys. But yeah, man, being open to it. I mean, whatever size it is, just giving room for God to do His thing, and sitting back
Oh
and
yeah.
watching. It's
Oh
absolutely
yeah.
amazing to be a
Yeah.
part of.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. So earlier you were talking, you mentioned briefly when you were talking brotherhood and discipleship, and you talked a little bit about biblical brotherhood.
Mhm.
What's an example or two that you would point to if somebody says, "Well, show me biblical brotherhood from the Bible"? What is something that you would point out as a story that you would use to teach on that or share on that? What would be one of those examples?
Yeah, I mean, Old Testament wise, you can look at the story of David and Jonathan and the friendship that they had there. Jonathan was, I mean, he was there for King David, um, good or bad. He stood by him and he spoke truth into his life, and that's a great example of what we want to see. In New Testament wise, I'm a big fan of Peter because the guy
Mm.
doesn't seem to be able to keep his mouth shut, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of us can relate to him. But you just look at just Jesus's interaction with his disciples. I mean, obviously he's our ultimate example.
Yep.
And we talk about when Jesus went up and asked the disciples to follow him, he didn't say, "Hey, sit down. Let's make sure that you have the entire Old Testament memorized before you hit the road." I mean, he invited them into his life, and they
Right.
just they learned and they had conversations around these fire pits as they traveled themselves. And when I look at that, I think, man, that's the example of what brotherhood should be. I mean, there was correction given when it was needed, but there was always love involved in it. The correction was always from a place of love and guidance, and walking alongside. And I'd love to hear some behind the scenes stories of what some of those conversations around the fire pits were, because
Oh yeah.
it's a group of guys. That
Yeah.
they were cutting up and they were having some good times as well. But
Oh yeah.
just ultimately, man, looking at the relationship that Jesus had with his disciples. I mean,
Yeah.
they were so real and so genuine, and that's what ultimately we should strive for in
Yeah.
that area.
Yeah, and it reminds me of that joke slash meme that's gone around for a while. It says nobody talks about Jesus's most amazing miracle, being a man in his 30s with 12 good friends.
Yeah, that's a lot of truth
And
for
it's sort of one of those funny slash sad because it's true. I mean,
sure.
Jesus is Jesus, right? He could have done what he needed to do without those guys.
Yeah.
But he said, I want these guys in my
Mhm.
life. And yeah, we should be modeling that behavior. We should be looking at that and saying, okay, if Jesus, a man who didn't have to have anything, if he
Mhm.
said, but I really need these guys in my life, then
Mhm.
then we should probably take a cue from that, and we should look at that and say, yeah, our job is to be following him in every way that we possibly can. And
Mhm.
there's one of them is he showed us that friendship is important, friendship
Mhm.
matters. And we can also learn, and you can share your thoughts on this if you like, he had different kinds of friends.
Mhm.
It's not that every friend is going to be exactly the same. Jesus had his inner circle of friends. So what about that? What about somebody saying, well, I've got a guy I can hang out with, and watch a game with. That's good. That's sort of good enough. What about a guy needing kind of different levels of friendship in his overall brotherhood?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, and I think that's important for all of us. I've got my three guys that those are my go-to guys. I mean, when I hit a wall or I hit something going on, those are the guys I'm reaching out to, and those are the guys I know that I can share any struggle that I have at any given time with, and it kind of branches out from there. Then I got my guys that I spend a lot more time with. They may be the guys that we still have some good in-depth conversations, but a lot more of our relationships, kind of sitting around the fire pit with a larger group, or going
Yeah.
fishing together, or doing things like that. And then of course, being in ministry like I've got a big circle, like you mentioned earlier. You got guys all over the country, and it's not that I don't take advice and listen to things from them, and a lot of them I look to kind of example, but they're not part of my inner circle. And there's a lot of freedom in having that inner circle. I know that I've got those three guys that no matter what, I can reach out to, and I know that they're always going to receive me where I am in that struggle. And I mean, there's a lot of freedom that comes in that to go back to what we said early on, guys are missing that when they don't
Yeah.
have that, and it's
Yeah.
so vital and so helpful in our lives when we have that for sure.
Yeah. Yep. It is. We need it. We need it. So one of the things that doesn't come up too often when we talk about brotherhood is and friendship and men having that circle and that inner circle and having those guys is what is the impact on the man at home. And what I mean by that is not just what we mentioned earlier about um one of your friends being able to point out, something that you might not see, perhaps a blind spot. But what does it teach our kids to
Mm-hmm.
see this?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of men, as we talked about earlier, a lot of men are a lone wolf. They don't really have good friends. They don't have them around in their network. So what does it teach your children to see, what, dad, an adult man, he's got friends too? What do your
Yeah.
kids learn from that?
Man, they learn a lot. They learn everything we do.
Yep.
And it's cool to see is, my oldest now is 19 and I've got a 16-year-old and they now, they've come to be a part of our retreat and they see what we're doing. They're in it. But, the thing is they know the importance of me having these men in my lives, and they have the same thing, especially, talking to my 19-year-old, he's kind of starting to go out and experience life now. And,
Yeah.
he's got his tight circle of guys. I mean, he's got those guys that he knows that they're like-minded and they're pursuing Christ and they're walking that together. And, it's a great feeling as a dad. Well, you and your son's like, hey dad, me and my buddies are going to get together every Tuesday night and meet together, meet for a Bible study, or we're going to go through this book together. And that, my son's, he's had some tough times. He's had things come up and, he's got those guys that he can reach out to, just like I do. And I mean, I'll tell you, we don't give this next generation enough credit. Man, sitting down and talking with them, man, they've got some wisdom and some insight if we just allow them to grow in it. So they're growing in that through the process as well. And of course, it's still our job as dads to teach and to coach and guide. But they've got a lot of wisdom, a lot of things to really pour out. But yeah, kids watch what we do, everything we do, whether we do it the right way or the wrong way. And when they see my circle of friends, they tend to do the same thing. They build their own circle because they see the effectiveness of it. And not to get into my whole story, but like I said, there was a part of my life where I kind of was a phony in a lot of ways. I put up a good front at church, and my kids knew the real me at home, and they saw the change in my life when I really got plugged in with a group of men that cared, and it's a game changer in their life as well.
Yeah, because your sons will see, what, men are supposed to have friends, and your
Right.
daughters will see, what, men are supposed to have friends, and it helps them to have that vision of where are they going, what are they looking for in the future. Otherwise, you're raising lone wolves, and we know it doesn't work. So we need to be modeling for them that some better behavior. And you talked there just for a second about in my words, about wearing one mask at church and one mask at home. And a lot of guys do that. A lot of men do that. We've got our different masks. We have our mask at work. We have our mask at home. We have our mask at church. We have our mask if we have to take the car to the mechanic. Like we've got our mask everywhere where we're like, this is the role I have to play at this moment. And that's a tough one for a lot of men to break, because they sort of feel like, well, that's who I'm supposed to be in this moment. How did you work through that? How did you work through, the issue of, well, I'm one guy at church, but I'm a different guy at home? How did you work through that yourself?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the biggest thing was I just had to be honest with myself. I don't think I fully recognized how big of a phony I was at church. And for me, it took, a big life event. And when my son was born premature and we went through that, I mean, it broke me pretty hard. And it was going through that and getting into that group. But, the first thing I had to do is I had to recognize, who am I being? And looking back, I knew it. I just didn't want to acknowledge it. And I think as men, we've got to acknowledge that. And, I tell guys, this doesn't mean that when you walk into church on Sunday morning, you're not there to air out all your dirty laundry. But we gotta be real. I mean, you've got to have, going back again to that circle of friends, you got to have those guys that you can plug into that are going to be real with you and do that. And they're going to walk through you. So it was a process. I mean, I'd love to say that, man, it just dawned on me one day and I was like, man, I don't like being who I am. And I hope that's an encouragement to guys, because guys want to change. If they were like me, they had struggles at home, they want to change. And it's a process. And, getting men to come alongside me and being willing to ask those guys to be real with me was really the biggest part of it. And, they would get real in it. I hated it sometimes, when you'd have guys that are telling me like, hey, the way you're treating your wife right now, that is not the right way to treat your wife. And that's things you don't want to hear. But I had to be honest with myself and I had to recognize it. And along those same lines is I had to be honest with myself about things that my wife would share with me. When she would share with me things that she saw at home, because your wife and your kids know you way better than
Yep.
anybody else. They see the
Yep.
real you. So
Yep.
again, it comes back to pride. Honestly, there was a lot of pride involved, a lot of just dropping that pride, dropping that guard, and just an honest assessment of who I really am was really a
Yeah.
big part of walking through that.
And you mentioned in there about those guys, pointing things out to you. That's something that I encourage men, if they don't have these kinds of friends, it's not like you're going to go meet somebody tomorrow and you're going to say, "Hey, I want you to, play this part in my life."
Mm-hmm.
But you do need guys who play that part in your life. And so one of the things is giving them permission, so to speak, telling them, I am asking you, I am empowering you, I am enabling you. Tell me when I'm screwing up.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we'll be in that sort of church environment where it's a little too polite, it's a little too kind, it's a little too right. And so what was that like for you, sort of crossing that line from, okay, we're friends who can hang out together and maybe we can talk Bible together, we can talk stuff together, but I'm going to cross that line and I'm going to say, you know what, Travis, I need you to play this part in my life. I need you to be able to tell me when I'm messing up. What was it like for you to sort of make that transition between, this is a friend, now this is a good friend, now this is a guy who, yes, I'm giving you permission and I want you to tell me these things. I need you to tell me these things. How'd that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think a big part of it is, you look for people that have things in their life that you want to emulate, and that's what I would look for. If I want my marriage to get better, then I'm gonna look for the guy that has a rock solid marriage. And my relationship with my boys, I'm gonna look for dads that have a great relationship and are doing things right with their sons. And they're not perfect and they all have their own faults.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm looking for guys that I know are pursuing that. And for me, that was, first of all, I had to recognize that I had my faults, that there were those things I was ignoring. And then once I did that, it was looking for guys that, are doing it right. And then I would, we'd build this relationship. And the thing is, it's a very organic thing. It was never,
Right.
Most of the time, these guys weren't guys that I was like, stalking to find what their life was
Right.
like. And,
Right.
it was just God would cross our paths and you just start paying attention to, man, what does this guy's life look like? And those are the guys that I'd latch onto and I'd pull them aside. And a lot of times it was in very specific areas. I'd have guys that'd be like, hey, listen, I'm struggling in this area with my son. I see that you've been through that already and worked through it, or you're doing a great job of handling that. Would you mind coming alongside and just hold me accountable to what it is and
Yep.
getting wisdom from them? So,
Yep.
there's really, I've got different guys, and that's the importance of having a few guys in your inner circle is a
Yeah.
few guys I'm going to go to depending on the situation and look for their wisdom. But it really, honestly, man, it really comes down to us, man, we have to be able to be honest with ourselves and recognize that we need it. When we're able to do that and we're able to look around and start recognizing, hey, man, there's guys that I do have in my life that are great godly men that are willing to walk beside me, just being willing to open up yourself and ask them for it and do that. So that's very organic, I would say.
And I like that you said the line in there about holding me accountable, because that's one of the most important things about having that kind of friendship, having that kind of brotherhood. Otherwise, it's not serving that purpose for you. That accountability is that's the difference maker, is that accountability. Yes, you might be able to have a good study with somebody, but the accountability thing, that's where life can really start to change. So yeah, I appreciate that you brought up the accountability. What what to you is the power of that? I may have front loaded the question there, I guess, but what to you is the power of accountability? Why is that so important in having those friends and having that brotherhood?
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, it's growth. I mean, you're looking for guys that are going to help you be better at every area of your life. And, the thing is about true accountability is, if me and you get together for accountability, all I'm doing is pointing out everything you're doing wrong. That's not really accountability.
Yeah.
Real accountability is, come alongside you and seeing an area of your life that needs improvement and then walking through what's a biblical approach to that and having conversations. And to me, that's been the biggest thing that I've had to learn because, it's easy, and we see this a lot in the church, is the condemnation aspect. Like, we want to point out the flaws without giving an answer. And having those guys that do that, guys that come beside you, and a lot of it, honestly, most of the time, the best guys to give you accountability are guys that have been there and messed it up themselves,
Yep.
and they can
Yep.
tell you what they've learned from. And and that's the advice I give people. A lot of times people ask me, "Hey, can you walk through this?" I said, "Well, I can tell you what not to do, probably better than I can what to do." I
Yeah.
have a lot of experience that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, are these guys, what is their intention? Is their intention just to point out every time you mess up? Because that gets very defeating as well. Or are these guys that are going to walk by and encourage you? And I've got a good friend of mine, Chris, that, man, he is so quick. He'll tell me if he sees an area in my life that I need to improve, but man, he's going to encourage me in everything that he sees that I'm doing right as well, and speak life into me. And that's the thing with accountability. It should be life giving, not life draining through it.
Yeah. And it's the example I like to use on that. It's sort of the difference between if you trip and you fall down and you're down in the mud next to a road, somebody can walk by and point at you and say, "Hey, you tripped." Somebody else, though, can walk by and get down there with you and help you out.
Yep.
To me, that's the distinction there, is you're looking for the guys who are going to go, "Yeah, you tripped, you messed up, but you know what? I'm coming down there with you and I'm helping you out." And a lot of times the way they're helping out is, to your point, is because they've been in that pit before. They have fallen down in that same spot before. And so they know the path, they know the way out. And it might not exactly be your way out, but it might be enough that you can latch on to bits and pieces and sort of claw your own way out, but
Sure.
with their help, with their assistance. Because you're right, it's easy to just point and say you did something wrong, because we all do that all the time. Like, we're messing up all the time. So, but we don't need that. What we need is, yeah, you might have done something wrong, but here's the path forward. Here's the way forward. So I like that. I like that you brought that up. So I want to bring it back to, I asked a little bit about at home, how having friendship, having brotherhood, how that impacts your kids. What does your wife see? In a man who has friends, how does that change his marriage? What happens there?
Yeah. Hopefully she sees good things.
Yeah.
No, I mean, she sees the value in it, and that's the thing. When you seek godly men to walk alongside, it's going to be a direct reflection into your marriage. And I'll give you an example. We had a young couple that was at our house, that came out. They were going through marriage counseling, and the couple that was counseling them is actually this good friend of mine, Chris, I mentioned earlier. They brought him out here to the house, and they were kind of asking questions about, how do you overcome difficult things? How did me and my wife get through having a special needs son and all that in our marriage? And he was asking questions, and the young man that was getting married, he asked me, he said, "How do you keep from going out with your buddies and bad mouthing your wife?" And I said, "I hang out with guys like Chris that I know aren't going to allow me to do that. If I go out with Chris and I start bad mouthing my wife, he's going to straighten me out real quick. And It doesn't mean that we don't have struggles in our marriage that we talk to these guys about. There's a difference in discussing some struggles you're having for advice and bad mouthing. And my wife knows that. She knows that I have guys that they want me to be a better husband, a better father, and they're going to pour into me in that aspect. So she sees the value in it. And the big thing I would say is, don't allow your brotherhood to become your life. Your priority is your home, your wife, your kids. That is your priority. It's kind of like you mentioned earlier, the church is there to help us. Well, those brothers are there to help you as well. But your home's your primary ministry, and your wife and your kids need to know that they are your priority during those times. But yeah, absolutely see it. I'll tell you, one of the best compliments I ever got from a lady was, her husband came to the men's retreat one year, and the next year it fell on her birthday. And so I sent her a message, said, "Hey, I hate that it's on your birthday. I'm sure, he won't be able to come." And she said, "Absolutely not. He will be there." And then she put hashtag marriage changer. And I thought, man, that's, when you hear that from the wives, that means something to me. Because guys are always like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing great."
Yeah, right.
But, when the wives are there saying, "No, really, we see a difference." That's what really, it's encouraging. It's encouraging to see that, and it applies in our own life as well.
Yeah. One of the other benefits, I think, that comes out of a man having a couple good friends, is it relieves some of the pressure that he had been putting on his wife. Mm-hmm. If a man is a lone wolf, that means everything has to go on his wife's shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not her role. And so there's a little bit of tension release in a marriage when a man has a couple friends that he can go to for friend stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean she's not your friend. I don't mean that in any way. Your wife is your friend, right? That's part of that relationship. But being able to pull some of that weight off of her shoulders and give some of those accountability issues to your friends
Yeah.
is really a good benefit and help to your marriage. And what are some of your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. My wife will, there's times if I have something going on, she'll tell me, hey, you need to go call so and so.
Yeah.
Get together with them. I mean, she
Yeah.
recognizes it, and
Yeah.
and it goes both ways. It's so important for us to make time for our wives to have
Right.
some women in their lives that they
Yep.
have time to get out and do
Yep.
that with, and it's a balance. We both recognize that. We want to be there for each other as much as we can, but we also need to recognize that men and women are wired differently, and there's going to be things that I can talk to the guys about, things she can talk to her friends about, that it's going to be different than being able to talk to each other. So it's huge. I think it's vitally important to have those, and you're absolutely right. It takes a ton off their shoulders because they're hearing us complain about things that they don't know how to help us with, and it becomes a big burden in their
Yeah.
life. So it's a huge outlet for them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned in there briefly, men and women are different. True. Hope we don't get canceled for that point. Um, but we're living in a weird culture right now,
Mm-hmm.
and culturally, um, this issue of Christian brotherhood is not necessarily embraced. Christian anything is not really embraced in our culture right now, at least from my view. How do you see current culture issues impacting friendship, men being friends with one another, brotherhood? How is current culture impacting this issue from your view?
Um, I'll just be honest with you. I don't think we haven't seen a lot of impact outside from outside culture. We probably see more impact from church culture. Church
Mm,
culture has built this culture of, as men, we're supposed to have our lives together, and we come to church and
yeah.
we look good. And men are scared to open up and say, hey, I've got a real struggle in my life.
Yeah.
When you look at the statistics of, the men in the church that struggle with pornography, and yet it's a topic that's never addressed in church.
Right. Right.
It's so I honestly, I feel like a lot of times we're fighting church culture as much as we are outside culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say along those lines that I mean, there's some things that, especially these, the younger generations coming in right now. I mean, they're facing things through social media that fortunately we didn't have to face
Right.
growing up to the extent that they are. And we're going to have a battle. I mean, we're fighting for their hearts and their minds in that way. But the thing that really what I've seen out of this brotherhood is when you have genuine brotherhood, people are drawn to that. They really are. People see, I look at that small group we had. We started out with the 3-4 guys, and as it grew, people saw that. And I feel like we drew more people in because they saw the relationship that we had, and they wanted
Yeah.
that more than anything. They heard what we were saying or speaking. So I think it's a desire among men's hearts. I really do think men desire this brotherhood. But we just, as a culture, whether it's the world's culture or the church's culture, we've put up these barriers in it. It's
Yeah.
sad to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you on the church culture issue as well. And the topics and subjects that are talked about within church in the average survey that I read over and over and again, not only are the church members struggling with porn, but the pastors are.
Mm-hmm.
Statistically, well over 50% of the
Yep.
pastors say they're struggling with or addicted to porn themselves. And again, it's not discussed, it's not talked about. It's sort of, you go figure that out and then come back.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help anybody. And I think that's one of the reasons why men in so many churches, the male attendance is going down, is
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, where are those conversations? Where are those things to help me through this stuff? Because it's ruining my life, it's ruining my marriage, it's ruining my, I need help. And then I
Yep.
go to the church, and the church says, yeah, we don't really talk about that here.
Right.
And similar, I have a group called the Fellowship, and we spent the previous month all on mental health issues, and we
Mm-hmm.
were talking, we were talking about depression and we were talking about suicide, two other topics that aren't really discussed in the church. Depression is touched on sometimes, but
Mm-hmm.
suicide almost never is
Yep.
touched on in the church. And statistically, that's getting worse by the day in our country, especially for our kids.
Yep.
And so those issues have to get talked about. Um, how does a brotherhood help talking about those really hard issues? Because it would be one thing to say we're just going to get together and we're going to study Romans or we're going to study Acts, and that's great, not knocking that in any way. But how
Mm-hmm.
does a brotherhood help men? We're going to have to talk about porn. We're going to talk about infidelity. We're going to talk about depression. We're going to talk about suicide. We're going to get into these things. How
Yep.
does a brotherhood help men with those kinds of conversations?
Yeah, well, I think the big thing, when I talk to guys, especially guys who want to start a small group and they want to have those kind of real conversations, the big thing I tell them is you have to be real yourself. When you go into these groups, don't come in there leading that impression of, I've got my life together and I'm here to help you get there too. Be real about our struggles. I have struggles and battles that I face, and I'm real with those with when I'm in my small group circle. Let them know. So to me, I mean, that's a big part of it is just being real and honest about what's
Yeah.
going on. Have an honest checkup, before you crack open the Bible and say, hey, turn to Romans 1, go around. Hey, what's going on in your life? What's really happening? And be willing to do a little digging. And it's kind of a balancing act. Obviously, you can run guys off if you push too hard. But do a little digging, getting to know guys. And the big thing is, again, I'm a big fan of discipleship, and discipleship is more than a Bible study. And it's those guys that you're reading Romans with. Maybe you're doing that on Wednesday nights, but Friday nights, let's go fishing. Let's go sit by the lake and do some fishing, because that's where real conversations happen. So engage in these men's lives, get to know them, get to know what's going on, get to know their family. And, through that process, that's really where we're going to start seeing that more genuine conversation right. come out.
Yeah.
Because a lot of guys, and I was the same way, I wouldn't have walked into a group of strangers and sat down to a Bible study and shared a struggle that I
right.
had in my life.
Right.
So it's working on building that environment, and it really starts with you yourself. You have to be open and willing to share that yourself.
Yeah. And for the guys who are listening, if you're trying to build or getting ready to build and start a group and get some guys together, some friends together, it's important that you heard that line in there that it's going to take some time. Mm-hmm. It's not normal that you'll get 3 or 4 guys together and your first conversation is super, super deep in these really serious personal issues. It's not normal. As men, we are guarded, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get there. And yes, leading by example is the best way to get there. So don't invite the new guy to the group and have Bob there. And the first thing you say is, so Bob, are you struggling with porn? I guess that's not going to go well. And so take some time, bring the guys together, create this group, because it's important for you to have it in your life. It really is. As we get close to wrapping up, I love to give everyone an opportunity to just a very big open-ended question. So what is something that relates to Christian Brotherhood that you'd love to leave guys with? Any sort of topic you could touch on, something we've already talked about or something entirely different. What do you want to leave guys with when it comes to Christian Brotherhood?
Yeah. Man, that's a good question. Big open-ended question. Really, I mean, just to reiterate some of the things that we've said is, number one is be honest with yourself. What is your walk with Christ look like, and what do you want it to look like? And when I joined the Navy, when I reported to my first ship, the chief that I worked for, he sat me down and he said, do you want to be successful? And I said, absolutely. Of course, that's always the right answer in the military, right? Yes. Whatever you say sir. That I want, that's what I want. And he told me, he said, then go find people that are successful and get in their back pockets. And to me, that's been something that I've held on to. We as men, I've yet to meet a man that's hit the point where he's like, man, my marriage is perfect, my kids are perfect, my work's perfect, everything's perfect. Yep. I don't need anything. So no matter where we are in our life, continually be, ask yourself, like, what do I want my marriage to look like? What do I want my relationship to my kids look like? And then go out and find the man that can come alongside you and help do that, because it's so much easier. I wish I would have grabbed onto this concept a lot sooner than I did, because when I look back on the years before I had that circle of friends and that real brotherhood, and I think, man, I could have saved myself a lot of heartache and a lot of struggle early on if I would have done that. So, First, I think the big picture thing is just, one, be honest with yourself and be willing to put yourself out there. There are guys that, unfortunately, you may go to a group and it's not the right group of guys. It may take a little time of you finding the right group of guys, but I can promise you they're out there. And man, when you find them, it's a life changing thing. And be prayerful about it. Pray that God's going to put those guys in your life, and then listen to where he leads you. So.
Yep. Yep, that's a great place to end, because that really is the most important. Make sure you're in communication with God and you're going where He wants you to go. It's not just all what you want. Yep, love that. If guys want to find out more about your work and what you do, where do they go? How do they find you?
Easiest way is go to element26men.com, so you can find information about us on there. Also on Facebook, we've got an Element 26 Men's Ministry page. We'd love to connect with guys on there and continue to grow and build these relationships.
Awesome. And I forgot to ask you this earlier. It's probably because in my head it's self-explanatory, but Element 26 might not be. So why Element 26?
Yeah. So Element 26 is iron. So based off Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron. So that's what Element 26 comes from.
Yep. Love it. Love it. All right, Travis. Well, hey, thanks for your time today. Have an awesome rest of your day.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man.